All right. Hi, everyone. So we're going to continue the course. We're going to switch gears completely. So the next section will be on social engineering. Social engineering is something we've seen. We've talked a bit about it in the context of attacks on HTTPS. But in this case, we're going to do a deeper dive. So this will kind of span 2 lectures. We'll go through the background material and the theory of it. And then I'll tell you lots of stories about examples from real life examples of social engineering. Okay, so social engineering, if we want to put a definition on it, you can think of it as trying to gain access to something. It might be information, like something digital. It might be something physical, like access to a specific room. So we're being very general when we talk about access, and specifically, in order, one way to get access would be to go through a human. So there's a human, and their job, or for whatever reason they find themselves in this position, they're the ones that are going to screen access and say, yes, you have access. No, you do not have access. Okay. And sometimes this is explicit, like it's part of their job. They know that they're doing it. Sometimes it's more implicit, like it's sort of in the background. You don't really think of it as your day-to-day job, but you have the power to override certain things, and that would ultimately allow people to have access, even though you don't really necessarily think about it in those terms. Okay. So for example, maybe you work in key control at a corporation, like say Concordia, right? And so you implicitly have the ability to grant people access to certain rooms or not, depending on what key you cut for that person. But you're not necessarily thinking about what those rooms are and what's inside those rooms and things like that. That's maybe more explicit of an example. Implicit would be like even more kind of in the background, like maybe you have the ability to reset someone's password, but you're not thinking about all the things that are attached to that password. Like when that person has that password, then they can send an email, and the email will look like it comes from them, and then that email could ask key control to give them access to a room because they lost their key, or to get a backup key or something like that. And so like all of this kind of traces back to the idea that you reset their password, even though you're not really thinking about it as something that you're not thinking through the whole attack. So think of attack tree, and there's lots of branches leading up to the attack. Anyways, social engineering is a very prevalent vector of attack today. So sometimes it's the entire attack, sometimes it's just a piece of the attack, but attackers have sort of woken up to the idea that sometimes it's a lot easier to just get on the phone with someone and try and maybe pretend to be someone that works there and get access that way, rather than doing some sophisticated technical hack of the company. So social engineering, it's very prevalent. And one time I went to a bank, and the people at the bank said, we have like a couple hundred people that work on security on the infrastructure side. We have about 2 people who kind of deal with social engineering, although it's not like a well-defined role. It's just sort of something that happens to come across in the job that they do. And but 95% of the attacks that we see are social engineering attacks. Someone trying to reset a bank password or get access, or calling up and claiming to be someone that they're not, right? And only 5% are attempts, at the networking level to breach the server or attack the infrastructure or that type of thing. So the idea is that social engineering is sort of disproportionately used compared to how many people a corporation will hire in order to prevent it. And then from an academic perspective, right, if there's so much social engineering attacks, why don't we have courses on social engineering? So it's this sort of thing that it's harder to study, it's harder to write an exam question about social engineering, and so it tends to not get very well coverage from within academia, even though it even though it's maybe the most prevalent attack vector today. So anyways, that's why it's in this course, is we're trying to cover maybe some of the things that fall through the cracks of the other traditional security subjects that you would study, like network security, operating system security, crypto, that type of thing. Okay, now this is a methodologies class. Okay, so we would like to know, okay, what's the methodology for determining, let's say you're a company, you want to decide whether you're vulnerable to social engineering or not. So what's the methodology that you use? Okay, and the answer, unfortunately, for this course is that there is no methodology. So the theory of social engineering is sort of way behind its prevalence. And so at the end, I'll suggest a few methodologies that might be interesting to look at. But we're still going to study it from a methodological perspective, in the sense that we're going to think about what does it mean to be secure. And we're going to do the sort of the background work. So before you start applying methodologies, I've emphasized this many times in the course, you need to understand what you're analyzing before you actually do the security analysis of it. So for social engineering, it's going to be less about the methodologies, but more about just that sort of general understanding. And we're still going to apply frameworks, and we're going to try and break the problem down, and we're going to try and categorize the kinds of things that we see. We're going to look for patterns. So we're going to do a lot of the things that we do in methodology, even though it's not explicitly, like, it doesn't have a name like evaluation framework or attack tree or stride or whatever. Okay, so that will be the focus. Social engineering is also interesting because now it's becoming, you can get a job like basically being a penetration tester, but you do it from more of a social engineering perspective. A lot of hacker conferences have like social engineering challenges and things like that, and so it's the industry, even though they may be lagged, they are waking up to the idea that this is important, and you need expertise within your company or your firm in this issue. Another thing I'll emphasize is that ethical issues, so ethics means sort of what's right and what's wrong, and legal issues are also important. So a lot of the attacks that we'll look at, just like Heartbleed, we mentioned that this was an attack, it was a technical attack, and somebody got criminally charged, for trying to see whether Revenue Canada was vulnerable to this attack or not. Social engineering is the same idea. Okay, so a lot of the attacks and things that we'll talk about in the coming lecture will be, some of them will be illegal for you to do. So these are done by black hat hackers. And sometimes they might be legal strictly, but there's some ethical issues that you have to think about, especially if you're one of the white hats, meaning the people who work for the company. You're just trying to test your own organization. You don't want to go around getting people fired and things like that. And so you have to think through the ethics. Okay, so here's some just quick examples, just so that we sort of get a flavor of what we're talking about. So one example that we saw already is when we were talking about certificate issuing for HTTPS. This example actually had to do with code signing certificates, but it's the same idea. You get a certificate, and there's a chain that chains back to some root certificate that's in your computer. In this case, it's for knowing whether a software update actually comes from the manufacturer of the software, as opposed to knowing whether you have a secure tunnel between your website and a company's, or like the website that you're trying to visit. And so what happened in this case is there was someone who used to work at Microsoft. They still had some credentials, like maybe an employee card or things like that. They basically had enough so that when they went to the certificate authority, and my understanding is this might have been an in-person interaction or at least on the phone or something like that. They were credentialed enough, and they told enough of a good story that the certificate authority believed that they actually worked at Microsoft. And so then they issued them a certificate as if they gave them the certificate that included their own private key that corresponded to the public key in the certificate, and they gave it to them. Okay. Another thing that I mentioned already as a sort of example is like you might want access to a server room so that you can do a technical attack once you're in the server room. So you have physical access to the computer. It's going to turn into a technical attack at that point, but you need access first. And so one way you might do it is you might, for example, if the company outsources their IT to someone else, you might figure out, okay, who's that company? You might put on the uniform of that company or something that looks like it. You'll walk in looking like a sort of IT person where you have, I don't know, like a toolbox or tools around your belt or whatever that would typically look like something that an IT person would have. And then you're going to impersonate them. You're going to tell them, oh, I'm from this company. I need access for whatever reason. And then you're going to hope that you get through. Okay. And IT isn't the only thing. It could be, janitor staff, like cleaning staff, that type of thing. And basically anyone that might have access to that room for any reason, that's a vector that you could use. Okay. And usually, I guess sometimes they might have credentials already, so they don't have to ask someone, but I'm envisioning a corporation where it's set up like there's a sort of desk that you would have to go to and ask someone to let you into the room. Another example are called road apples. So road apples are, it's an attack anyway that involves a USB stick. So that's what the picture is. So a USB stick is a dangerous thing to plug into your computer. And it used to be more dangerous. I mean, operating systems are sort of waking up to the fact that this is dangerous. But in order to make them work like in a plug and play fashion, what would happen is that your operating system might start executing code that's on the USB stick. Okay. And sometimes, even if the operating system is not going to do this, or it's going to ask user permission before it does it, there might be an exploit or something like that in the operating system that could get around it. Okay. So if you plug in one of these USB drives into your computer, there's the chance that software starts executing, and that software could be malware. Okay. And so what people would do, the social engineering aspect is, okay, you need someone to run one of these USB drives. So you would go to a corporation, you would just sprinkle them around the parking lot, like maybe drop 5 or 10 of them around the parking lot. And your hope is that somebody comes and they plug it into their computer. They find it. They're like, I don't know, it's probably one of my friends or someone that works at the company. Maybe if I plug it in, there'll be, a document with their name on it or something like that. And I have a chance of returning it to the right person. Right, so they'll just carry it into the corporation. They'll plug it into a computer, and then the malware will infect the computer. So, an example of road apples that's it's partially speculation. Like no one, I don't think, knows for sure, but this is the sort of the going theory. Is there was a very high profile nation state attack. So this is like governments doing espionage against other governments and operations. And so this one concerned Iran, they had like a nuclear facility. They claimed it was for energy. Other countries thought that they were using it to manufacture nuclear weapons. And two of those countries happened to be the United States and Israel. And so they had this joint operation where they were going to infect the computers that were running the reactor with malware, and the malware was called Stuxnet, and it became a very famous piece of malware once it was discovered, and it would basically make subtle changes to how the reactor would work, and those subtle changes would cause the reactor to break down, but the monitoring tools that you would use to monitor the reactor would basically display information that would be consistent with the idea that it was operating correctly. And so they were able to sabotage this reactor just using malware, essentially. The problem is that the reactor was air-gapped. So air-gapping meaning that the computers were not connected to the internet. They weren't connected to a network. So the only way that you could get malware on these in this network would be to get physical access to the servers. And so no one knows, I don't know if people know exactly how Stuxnet itself worked, but the understanding is that there were a couple pieces of malware that were installed first that just sort of gathered information about what was running, and then Stuxnet was tailor-made for the information that they were getting from this predecessor malware. I think it was called Flame. The detail slips my mind at the moment, but anyways, that original piece of malware was thought that it was carried across using an attack something like this. It was on a USB stick, and somebody brought it in from the outside and they weren't an attacker. They weren't trying to break the system. They weren't a double agent or anything like that. It was just human error. They plugged it in, and it had this sophisticated piece of malware. Because it was developed by a nation state, it exploited all sorts of things in the operating system that no one even knew about, even the manufacturers of the operating systems. So anyway, so that's an example of this road apple attack. Sorry, I have a little news article here that describes the connection between them. And then the quote is, the primary functionality of Stuxnet Resource 207 module was distributing the infection from one machine to another using removable USB drives and exploiting vulnerabilities in Windows kernel to obtain escalation of privilege within the system. Okay, another thing is sometimes with companies you can actually call them. So think of a bank or something like that. So you can get on the phone and they have no idea who they're talking to, right? There's no authentication on phone lines, and you can spoof phone numbers and things like that. And so they're going to ask you some authentication questions, but at the end of the day, they're questions that somebody might know the answer to, even though they aren't the actual person themselves. And you can also try and be very persuasive. The attacker that's calling in, they can manufacture some emergency situation where they really need the access, or they can tell some sort of story about why they don't have the answers to the authentication questions and things like that. And so this is something that's tightened. Security has tightened around this a lot. But 10, 20 years ago, it was a lot easier. People were more believing of the people that called. And so this was a major attack vector, but it still exists today. Another way of spreading malware is through emails. So you could have malware in an attachment in a file. The file could actually be just executable code. Usually most email clients aren't going to be okay with you downloading that. But it could be in some sort of passive file like a PDF, which normally you display. But PDFs are very powerful. Like they're capable of running script and executing code. And there could always be vulnerabilities in the reader of the PDF. And there are known vulnerabilities, right? So if I know that this organization is a little bit behind in which version of Adobe Reader they're using, right? And I know that there's some vulnerability that was discovered in the latest, 2 or 3 versions, then I might craft malware that specifically targets a version that's 2 or 3 things old. And a lot of times it's hard in a company because you have hundreds of computers, and to upgrade them all at the same time every time new software comes out without breaking things, it's a whole task in and of itself. So anyway, so malware in an attachment is one way of spreading it. You might also link to a website if you can get them to click on it. Maybe there's a problem again in the browser, the specific version of the browser they're using, or something like that. And so far, this isn't really social engineering. The social engineering aspect is, how do I get you to click on that email? How do I get you to click on downloading that attachment? And so what I want to do is I want to disguise it as an email that sort of entices you, or sometimes I might impersonate someone in your business. So like I get emails that are supposedly from our dean or our director, and they're asking for help. And ultimately they want you to give them money by buying a gift card and sending them a code or something like that. So it's a scam, but that's where the social engineering part comes in. Okay. Now where social engineering, we all see these emails probably. I mean, if you have an email address that's listed on the web, you basically automatically start getting spam and lots of, phishing emails and those kinds of things. And a lot of them don't look very well. Okay. So you can quickly determine that, this is a scam, and you won't fall for it. But there's a specific subset of phishing called spear phishing, where the person really has identified you as the person that's screening access to the resource they want, to reflect back on the definition of social engineering. So they're targeting you specifically, and they've done research on you, and they know where you work. They know who your bosses are. They know who the other people you email with frequently are. They know what you like. They know what you post on social media, whatever, right? And so they're going to craft an email, and that email is specifically for you. It's going to be spoofed, so it's going to look like it came from one of your colleagues. It might entice you based on your interests. It might just be disguised as a kind of business email, like here's my student's thesis proposal, can you look it over or whatever, and it's exactly the kind of email that you would expect from exactly that kind of person, and those are a lot more difficult, especially if you go through your email very quickly to identify as being phishing emails. Okay, so like one noticeable change that happened, for example, not just within Concordia, I see it in almost all emails because it gets kind of reflected back in the replies to emails. But a lot of organizations now will start labeling emails with warning, like this email comes from outside of your corporation. And that really happened in response to people impersonating people, like, for example, someone impersonating the dean of engineering, but they send it from, say, a Gmail account, okay? And so that warning it's a very easy thing for software to pick up on, right? And it just says that, oh, this is not coming from a Concordia account. And then if you're thinking, oh, is this actually the dean or not? Well, he's going to use his Concordia account to send the email, right? And so that's the idea. Now, the problem is you get it on, I get it on 50% of the emails because most emails come from outside of Concordia. And so I stopped kind of paying attention to it, and I've fatigued to that warning, and so now it's like I don't even really see it, and so anyway, that idea of fatiguing to warning is something that we'll also come back to in the next section of the course where we talk about usability. Okay, so in order to think about social engineering in a more formal way, what we'll do is we'll kind of break the attacks down into a kind of framework, okay? And then we can think about all the different variations within a framework. So I read this book, Social Engineering by Christopher Hagnagi, and this is linked to on Moodle, and you can read it if you want to read it. But anyways, he presents a framework in the textbook. I didn't quite like his framework. I felt like it included some extra stuff that weren't really necessary, and there was a whole bunch on, like, I forget what he called it, like cognitive programming or something like that. And I'm not an expert in that area, but based on what other, the scientific literature was saying, it seemed kind of like pseudoscience and things like that. So anyway, I kind of went in and kind of stripped out the things that I thought were sort of controversial or not 100% like based in science. But it still leaves you with a super useful framework. So it's a little simpler. It basically has three categorizations, and then the third you can subcategorize. Okay, so the first categorization is information gathering. So before you do a social engineering attack, you're targeting usually a specific person. Even if you don't know their name, you're targeting them at some level, right? So, like, for example, let's say you're pretending to be IT, knowing that the company outsources the IT, what company they outsource their IT to, what an IT person looks like, how they talk, that kind of thing. That would all be part of an information gathering stage. Okay. The second part is the pretext. So pretext is just a fancy word for pretending to be someone that you're not. Okay. So that's a flavor that almost all social engineering attacks have. If they don't have that flavor, it's probably not social engineering. So not all social engineering attacks are going to have all of these things, but pretexting is sort of the definitive feature of it being social engineering. So it's just you're pretending to be someone you're not. So you're saying I'm an IT person, but you're not actually an IT person. You're someone that's attacking the organization. And then the third thing is sort of what's your goal? What do you want to get out of it? And so this is your influence, and you can subcategorize it, even though there's a lot of overlap between the two, into what I call, or what it's called in the book, persuasion and elicitation. So persuasion is I want the victim to do something, so the attacker is trying to get them to open the door. Okay, so that would be persuasion. And then a variation on it is elicitation, which is you're trying to get information from the victim. So the attacker is trying to get the victim to disclose something that they're not supposed to disclose. Okay? And so the techniques that an attacker might use, there could be some difference between whether they're doing persuasion or elicitation, which is why we split them into subcategories. But there's a lot of overlap as well. It doesn't, for a lot of things, it doesn't really matter whether the attacker's trying to get information or if the attacker's trying to get you to do something. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example. So this actually comes from, so the author of this book did a TV series in England. It might have been on the BBC or Channel 4, I forget where it is. So they had this kind of like reality show where they would do some scams on people, and it was supposed as real as reality TV is. You know, this was real life scenarios, and so they would actually go out and do this in real life. They would have hidden cameras and capture it, and then they would reveal what they did. Okay, and so there's one example that he himself, I think, in the foreword to the book, he kind of holds up as a good example of illustrating this kind of framework in terms of thinking. So the example is, or the scam that they want to do is, they basically want to find a victim. They want to steal their bank card. So that doesn't necessarily require social engineering, right? Like if they have their bank card in a bag and they're not looking at their bag and you walk by and grab their bag, then that's fine. But where the social engineering really comes in is, in addition, they want to persuade the victim in order to reveal their PIN. So like the 4 or 6-digit PIN that protects the bank card. So once the attacker has the bank card and they also have the PIN, then they can start using the bank card, or they could sell it off to someone else that would use it. And we'll talk about the differences there in a couple of stories, later in this lecture. Okay. Now, I'm going to pause for 2 reasons here. So the first reason is I want to pause and have you actually think about how you're going to do this. Okay. And the condition is that you're not going to use coercion or violence or anything like that. Okay, so the victim will actually be happy to reveal this information, willing to reveal this information, and furthermore, whether you can try and achieve this or not, when the victim walks out of that situation, like when it's over, the attack is over, they actually don't know that they were attacked, at least not right away. Okay, so that actually is a pretty hard attack to think of trying to pull off. So just pause this video, hit the space bar, take a minute or two, and just think about how you would do it. It's a little fun to try and think about these things first, and then when you watch the video, then you can think about how they actually did it. Okay, so hit the pause button now. Okay, so I'm going to say that you've unpaused the video now. Okay, so we're going to watch this video. Now, I'm going to try and do this one of 2 ways. This is an experiment. Because I'm recording this and I'm putting it on YouTube, YouTube might decide that this content is in violation of copyright. It actually isn't, because I'm using it for educational purposes, but they have these automated tools and things like that. So, I'm going to just try and play the video. I'm also hoping the audio routes through to the video. So I'm just going to try and play it and keep it as part of this video. But there's also a chance that I have to edit the video out, in which case you're going to see that this video is going to end in a second. And then because it's on YouTube, I'll just put it as the next video in the playlist. I'll put the link in the show notes as well. So I hope you enjoyed that video. It was kind of fun, maybe a little cheesy, but it demonstrates an actual social engineering attack, and it actually demonstrates the framework pretty well. Okay, so let's go through the framework and we'll see how it applies to this specific scenario. And then after that, then we'll go into more of the boring details of going through each of the elements of the framework and kind of working out the theory of it. Okay, so remember the framework is information gathering, pretexting, influence, either a persuasion or elicitation. Okay, so let's start with information gathering. So think about the video and think about what kind of information gathering did the attackers have to do before conducting the scam. So I'll pause. I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, so the answer is that there's actually not a lot of information gathering. So this attack is a lot more about the pretext and about, the persuasion. Elicitation is actually the main one. But there's a few things that you might pick up on. And I should note that this is just, it's not like I analyze every little last detail, so I might be missing things as well. But the first thing is you need a location in order to conduct it. And so knowing that a food court is a good sort of place to do it, people are there, they might not be looking at their handbags. There's other people's around. It's easy to distract them, like with asking them to take a picture, that type of thing. If you walk by and pick up the handbag, you're maybe not as likely to someone's not, like, there's the chance that a third party notices it, right? But food courts tend to be pretty busy and people are concentrating on talking and eating and things like that. And so anyways, just sort of picking that as, it's not like the only location that would work. There's probably lots of locations, but it was a good location. Okay, so some thought went into that. Then when you show up, you have to find a target. So they could have targeted anyone in that food court. Okay, and so they're looking for someone where the banking card is probably, there's always a chance that it's in their pocket or something like that, even if they have a handbag, but you're looking for that. In this case, the target was targeted because their friend had left to use the washroom, so they were alone at least for that moment, and they felt that they were able to distract them in order to offer to take a picture. They didn't look unfriendly, like they would say no to taking a picture or something like that. They weren't clutching their handbag. The handbag was sort of on a chair that was sort of beside them, that all of that type of thing. Okay. So anyways, and then there's also like the pretext, which we'll get into, like what all they were, but each of the pretexts you would also have to have some background information on, like what that pretext will look like. So I'm deliberately not saying what they are because I want you to think about that next, but there's all the background researchers on creating a realistic pretext. Okay, so pretexting. So what are the pretexts? So this is someone pretending to be someone that they're not. Okay, so what elements of pretexting are there? So think about it. Now I want to encourage you to, there's one that's obvious, right, which is the bank employee, right, pretending to be the bank employee. But there's more than that pretext. So if that's the only pretext you got, take another couple minutes and think. There's 4 by my count. You could maybe count them in slightly different ways. Okay, so the 4 that I saw were, there was the tourists that were acting like tourists. It was sort of a spontaneous interaction. They asked for a picture. Okay, so that was the first one. They looked like tourists. They looked like there was nothing really about that pretext that you wouldn't believe, or you would think that they were people that were acting in that role. Okay, they looked like they could be a couple. Like there was nothing really that was sort of off, I would say, about that interaction. It was pretty natural to ask someone else, like you maybe been in places where you see other people taking pictures and they ask other people that are around to take pictures. And so there wasn't anything like particularly strange about that interaction. So it came off as pretty natural. And so some thought went into that in terms of making that spontaneous. Okay. Now, the result of that was that the victim was distracted and they weren't watching their handbag. And so the the one guy who's actually the author of the book, who's pretending to be the bank employee, he was able to steal the handbag. Okay. Then the bank employee, okay, that's the other pretext. And so also, again, there was, bank employees don't necessarily look a certain way, but everything about the way he looked was consistent with what you might think of a bank employee, or maybe a Hollywood interpretation of a bank employee, right? Formal, he was wearing formal, like a suit. The briefcase is also something that you tend to use if in more formal situations. The way he talked, he was very confident, and he sort of took charge of the situation. He knew about the processes that banks used, and all of those types of things. So everything sort of about that situation was would lend you to believe that it wasn't someone impersonating a bank employee. Okay, now you're never 100% sure, right? But anyways, then this is something else I thought of that could have been clever that they didn't do. But one type of thing that sometimes people look at as a piece of authentication, even though it's not, are business cards. So if you're like, I work at Concordia, and pull out a business card, and the business card says Concordia, somehow that adds credence to the idea that I actually work at Concordia, right? But the truth is that you can get a business card printed with any name and any logo that you want, right? So what the bank employee could have done is he doesn't know. Remember, he asked her, what bank are you with? She says Barclays. Then he says, oh, I work at Barclays. He doesn't come up to her and say, oh, I work at Barclays. What's wrong? Right? Like that was, but it's easy to miss that, right? So she said a different bank, then he would have said, I worked at that bank. And what he could do is he could actually have a business card of the 5 or 10 major banks in his pocket. And then when she says Barclays, then he pulls out the Barclays business card and gives it to her. So anyways, that's just an idea for a way of making it even more realistic. Okay, another spoof is the call center operator, right? And so it sort of sounded like a call center. You have the office noise playing in the background. The way they're talking sounds kind of like they're bored, like they talk on the phone all day. They're very polite, but not necessarily engaged. They don't make small talk. It's sort of scripted, like this is the 10th call that they've gotten that day about somebody that's lost their bank card. So anyways, everything about it was sort of tailored to make it seem realistic. And again, you're just trying to not have the victim have a shadow of doubt in their mind, right? Nothing is sort of off about it. And then the last thing, you can call it pretext or not, but it would be that sort of automated system. And so this, also, it was meant to be automated, so it sounded robotic, even though it was a human that was reading the script out. And they had like sound effects for tones and things like that that made it sound like you're actually talking to an automated system. Okay, persuasion and elicitation. So this is, what is the attacker trying to get the victim to do? So in terms of persuasion, they're trying to get them to do something, and elicitation is they're trying to give up information. So giving up the bank PIN number is elicitation. So that's the main element of the social engineering attack. But that doesn't mean that there aren't smaller aspects of persuasion or other aspects of elicitation. So think for a second about, was there any aspect of persuasion beyond just trying to get the PIN number? So I noticed two, there might be more. One was that you wanted to get the victim to turn their back on the bag. So that was with the distraction of the tourists asking for a picture. That's persuasion. I mean, you're persuading them to do something. And then the other one that's a big one is this whole attack worked because the victim used the social engineer's phone. Okay? If the victim had pulled out their own phone and said, okay, give me the number of Barclays, I'll call them, right? That may still work. You could give them a number that actually routes to you, and they might not know whether it's a real number or not. But anyways, but the fact that they used, the victim's phone, that made the whole thing go very, very smoothly. Okay. And so, he says, he dials it. He doesn't even ask. He just is like, I work at Barclays, whips out the phone, puts the number in, before she can even say anything. And it's like, here you go. Okay. And In this scenario too, it's persuasion because it's not just, okay, so she could pull out her own. So think about the alternatives. So what are the alternatives? So she could use the phone, the attack works. She could pull out her own phone. In this case, her phone's probably in the bag that's missing anyways. Okay, so that's another thing about that makes the attack work a little nicer. Because she's at a mall, there's a good chance that there's a Barclays branch in the mall. So she could just say, it's fine, I'll just go to the bank in person and talk to them. And so that's actually a risk. So a shopping mall might not be the best place to do this attack because that's an easy alternative to accepting the phone. Okay. And then the fourth thing is to basically say, I'm not going to use your phone for this, and basically reject the offer to help. And the problem with this is it can sort of seem insulting, like you're sort of insulting the person. You're basically saying, I don't believe you, in terms of who you are. And so persuasion plays on that. It makes you have to do something that's emotionally uncomfortable or socially uncomfortable in order to do the right thing. So the right thing would be to not accept the phone and not use the phone. But, because the way the scenario has been concocted, you would have to do something sort of socially awkward to sort of get out of using that. You risk offending someone that's actually trying to help, supposedly, right? And so all of that, that's manufactured to try and push you into just, take the phone and use it. Okay. And then elicitation. So you have basically the idea of obtaining the PIN is elicitation. Okay. And so, again, it's not just you ask and they say yes. It's you manufacture, like the adversary is manufacturing a scenario here to make it an easier option to just give up the information, right? So it's kind of a stressful situation. The idea of it being time sensitive, like if you don't cancel it quick enough, then the person who stole your card might use it, right? That's sort of a subtext of what's happening. And so it makes it seem time sensitive. Like, I have this phone, I can just do it right now. And in 5 minutes, I'll be done. Or I can go to the bank or go home and call from a different phone or whatever. But, that's going to be an hour later. And, by that time it might be too late or whatever, right? So putting that time pressure, that's a common tactic that's used in order to persuade people, to influence people to do things, whether it's persuasion or elicitation. It's also stressful, so you're not thinking straight. This thing happened, and you want to fix it right away. You're not, you don't have the luxury of time. You're not sitting back. You're not relaxed thinking about it. It's a very stressful situation. Okay, so all of these tend to lead the victim to give up information more easily than they might otherwise. The other thing is that the banker, seems confident, they seem helpful. So you have a kind of, we talk a lot in social engineering about a rapport, which is your kind of how comfortable you feel with the other person, right? So if the other person makes you feel comfortable, then we would say you have a good rapport. And if they make you feel uncomfortable or they give some indication that something's just sort of off about them, then you might say you have a bad rapport. And so it's a human condition to be more vulnerable to influence by someone that you have a good rapport with as opposed to a bad rapport. The other kind of elicitation was the use of the automated system. So this is all part of the same thing. I split it out just so that we could talk about it specifically. It's still about eliciting the PIN. So in this case, they set up this idea that the human operator can't take the PIN off you, so you have to use the automated system. That doesn't actually really hold up. If the automated system can learn the PIN, why can't the human? Because there's some human that controls the automated system, even in a real life kind of banking scenario. And so anyways, it's kind of a weird thing from my view, but anyways, it seemed to work, and the person seemed comfortable using it, and it seemed somehow more secure to give it to a robot as opposed to give it to an actual human. So anyways, I can't argue with it if it actually works. Right now, one thing that's a little dangerous about it is they did say, I forget the exact quote, but they said, the human operator said, I'm not allowed to take the PIN off of you for security reasons or something like that. And so what you're doing is you actually are planting a flag. The person hears it. Now you've primed them to think about security. So now they're thinking about, oh yeah, why is it that a human, like this all happens so fast that it probably isn't a complete thought, but you run the risk of them really sitting back and saying, oh yeah, my PIN is secret information and I can't just give it to everyone else. And this person, this person's not going to take it off of me. Why should I trust this robot to take it off of me? And so you're kind of preloading this idea of, you're getting them to think about security when you actually don't want them thinking about security at all. Right? This is a scenario where you're trying to get them not to think about, that's why it's stressful and it's time sensitive and things like that. You're trying to get them to abandon thoughts of security and just get it done. And so anyways, that's another thing about the attack that's maybe a little dangerous. But anyway, so the point is that this framework is actually quite useful. We can use it to break down the attack. We can even see ways that the attack could maybe be improved and maybe some areas where the attack might not work quite as well as you would think. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we'll go again slowly through all four, like three plus two subcases. So we'll go through the framework kind of line by line, and I'll give you lots of information about information gathering stuff, background about pretexting and influence and all that. And then at the very end, I'll just tell you a bunch of stories, kind of like the video that we just saw about other social engineering attacks. Okay, so the first stage that may be present, it's usually present at least in some extent in a social engineering attack, would be information gathering. Okay, so this is where the adversary wants to learn as much as they can about the target. The more you know, it's usually always useful to know more as opposed to less. And so there's lots of different ways of doing it. But some common ways of doing it would be just starting by seeing what you can see from the internet. So the internet has lots of information, especially when the adversary is targeting a business. Businesses usually have websites. They might have some of the employees, like maybe the executives that work at the company. There's social media, like LinkedIn, that's, you could go and see, you could find all the employees that work at a particular company. You could learn the name of the division that they work for. You could try and figure out the org chart, as they call it, like who's boss in the organization. You can learn names and maybe contact information and things like that. Then you can go beyond and look at personal social media. So, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or not LinkedIn, but Instagram, that Snapchat, whatever, TikTok. And you could, try and gather like, interests and other things. Maybe they even talk about the company stuff on social media as well. You could see like, oh, they're hanging out with this person who they work with and that type of thing. There's some tools that try and make this automated. So a lot of this, if you're just pulling information off a website, that could be automated. So a tool like Maltego will automate some of those tasks and find the links between people and things like that, give you some visualizations. Another thing that's used is password profiling. So this is where, say you want to guess someone's password, or that's part of the attack. So the adversary knows that people pick passwords poorly. We've seen that in previous lectures. And so one thing that someone might do is they might actually choose a password that's sort of based on some of the business terms that they're using. Like say there's a product name or something like that. And sometimes products have weird names, like they're not like a typical English name that's in an English dictionary. And so it kind of looks like it might be a good candidate for a password. And so what an adversary might do is they might just scrape the company website, distill it down into just the words that appear on the company website, and then they can build a password guessing dictionary out of it. So they'll include all of those words, but they'll include variations, substituting numbers for letters, that type of thing, like the number 3 for the letter E, those kinds of substitutions. Try and compound words, matching up to the words and things like that. So anyway, so that's a way that you can that the adversary might tailor a basic just password guessing attack against a specific person. Okay, another thing that's very, very useful is that you can often glean from things like social media would be vacation plans. Okay, so vacation plans are important for an adversary to learn, because when someone goes on vacation, there's a disruption to who's doing what task. Like someone, if they go for a vacation for a long time, like say a week or 2 weeks, then somebody else has to fill in for them in their job. Okay, and so let's just go back to the basic example of you're pretending to be an IT person and you want access to a server room. Think of the administrator that normally would say yes or no. That administrator, they deal with IT people all the time. They probably know their names, they know their faces. And so when you show up saying that you're there, that person's going to recognize that you're not, actually one of the people that they've interacted with in the past. Now, you might have a story or a cover for why that's the case. But it adds to the complexity of the social engineering attack. But if that person goes on vacation, now there's someone else that's sitting there, and that person has no idea, right? They maybe cover that desk, for 2 weeks every year, just when this other person's on vacation, right? And so they don't know who the normal people are. They don't know all the protocols and the procedures and things like that, because it's not their day-to-day job. Okay, so they might not be familiar with everything, and so they might be an easier target to influence and try and get what you want. Now, this can also backfire. You could get the exact opposite, right? It might be that because it's not their day-to-day job, they're really diligent and kind of paranoid about doing something wrong. And so they're actually a lot more strict with the rules, and they follow the rules, to the letter, whereas the person who's been doing it for 4 or 5 years, they tend to bend the rules. So it doesn't necessarily work in your favor. It could go either way, but there is that chance that disruption, changes the person that you're interacting with and their sort of experience, their past experience in that job, and that could change how easy an adversary finds it to influence. There's other kind of disruptions beyond vacation, so it could be, some sort of construction. So construction could be as simple as like, there's doors that normally are locked, but now they're not locked because construction crews are going in and out, and so the door is just held open, right? Or you could think of a kind of emergency kind of scenario, like very simply, let's say you pull the fire alarm, the adversary pulls the fire alarm. Now everyone's outside of the building. The adversary kind of blends in with the crowd. And now everyone's going back in the building. And normally, people kind of go in 1 or 2 at a time. But now you have 500 people that are all going into the building at the same time. They're a lot more likely to hold a door that would normally be locked open for the person behind them. So not everyone's swiping on the way in, because it would take too long. And so that's a kind of scenario where it's kind of unusual. It's out of the normal routine. And so people kind of drop their diligence in terms of security. Another attack vector that most corporations know about now, and so they're very, very careful about, but it used to be a very profitable attack vector for social engineers, is just going through garbage, right? So a lot of times garbage is picked up by the municipality, so it's on public streets. It needs to be publicly accessible for the municipality to pick it up. And there's all sorts of things that people throw out, right? So there's, pieces of paper that could have data on it, figures, economic information, accounting information. It could be bills. It could tell you, who this company has relationships with. It could be IT documents. It could be like say you get a new computer and they tape a piece of paper with the username and password on it. They tell you to change the password, but most people but some people will maybe just not change the password, and they'll throw the piece of paper in the garbage. And so eventually it ends up in the garbage, and now you have a username password for a machine. And then it doesn't have to be paper. It could be equipment like old computers, and there could be hard drives and things like that, right? So most corporations now are more careful about what they throw out. They'll make sure that documents are shredded before they're thrown out. They'll use private garbage companies to pick up their garbage, and you need access to even access the garbage, so it's not like it's just out on the curb of a public sidewalk. and all equipment will be, the hard drives will be taken out and things like that, and then the equipment will be disposed of, and the hard drives will be erased and things like that, or recycled. So corporations are more careful about this, but this is another example that classically was very important for social engineers. Okay, the next thing is pretexting. So very simply, pretexting is impersonating someone that you're not. What a pretext does is it's important to understand that the goal of the social engineering attack is not the pretext. Okay, the goal is the influence, the getting the person to do the thing that you want them to do, or getting the information that you want from the person. That's the goal. So a pretext is a means to an end. It's a way of trying to accomplish the goal, or kind of get you closer to the goal. Okay, so specifically what a pretext does, a good pretext, is it gets you closer to the person that you're targeting. So if the social engineering is targeting a specific person, they'll use a pretext basically to try and get them in the same room as that person, or try and get an email to that person to actually be read by that person. Pretext can look different ways. It's not always humans either, like we saw in the automated robot system in the previous video, that pretext isn't necessarily human either. But anyway, so the point is to get the social engineer in close proximity with the target. That's what the pretext does. And then once they're in close proximity, then persuasion, elicitation, as influence as the umbrella term, that's going to be used to actually achieve the attack itself. Okay, so if you just get them to believe that you're an IT person, that in and of itself isn't useful. Okay, so this is from a book, a paper book that I have, and unfortunately I lost it, and I can't for the life of me. I've Googled a lot to try and give credit to the author of this book, but I don't have the physical book before, and I took the picture and I forgot to note it, or it got lost or something like that. So unfortunately I can't give credit to where this came from, but anyways, it's a really nice list of some of the pretexts that would be common in a social engineering attack. So I won't read all of them. You can kind of look through them yourself. But we've talked a lot about like sort of IT support. I usually frame it as external, like you hire an external company, but it can be internal as well. So if it's a big enough corporation, then it could be like somebody comes, they say they work at the same company as you, but they're from the IT division, and you don't, because the company's so big, you don't, like Concordia is a good example. Like I wouldn't know all the IT people based on personally knowing them, recognizing them. Tourists is an example we saw in the video, asking for a picture. There's all sorts of like kind of relationship based things like family members, spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, partners, that kind of thing. You can impersonate actual people with authority, right? So it could be police, law enforcement, fire, ambulance, emergency services, that type of thing. And just harking back to the very first slide where I talked about legal and ethical issues, I just want to flag the fact that, as soon as you impersonate a law enforcement officer, that's immediately illegal. That's a crime, period. Okay, so a lot of these, if somebody's doing it in order to attack someone else, they're going to be crimes as well. Okay, but the pretext of doing things like pretending to be law enforcement is just a crime. So even if say you work for a security firm and someone hires you to test whether they have good social engineering practices or not, things like dressing up like a police officer, you just can't do. It's illegal even if you have permission to do it against the company. But anyways, so insect control is another thing where it might be like where people would normally get access to a room that they might not have access to. Delivery, cleaning, maintenance, that type of thing. Okay, so what do social engineers do in order to do a good pretext? Okay, so the first thing is a social engineer will struggle with pretexting if they're pretexting, say, an IT worker and they don't know anything about IT, that's going to be a struggle because, maybe they show up and they say, I need access to the server room. And the person says, oh, you're from IT. Great. I actually have a problem on my computer. Maybe you can fix it real quick. And then you can go into the server room. Right. And so that pretext might break down if they're unable to convincingly, at least diagnose the problem or something like that. Right. So having some level of expertise is important. And then confidence is also very important as well. Right. So social engineers will be very confident and sort of try and use that also as a form of influence because you wouldn't question someone that was so confident is the idea. Okay, now pretexting is a form of lying, right? And maintaining a lie is cognitively draining. So you spend a lot of brain cycles thinking about, whether you're projecting correctly and all the little details and trying to find the right words and the right jargon and things like that. So social engineers will find it difficult, to just go in and just lie, but then also pay attention because in order to use influence, you need to sort of track the conversation and try and think about, okay, what's a kind of tactic that would work with this individual. And if they're telling you information because you're eliciting it, you have to remember that information on top of lying. And so anyway, so it's sort of harder than it seems, right? So anyway, so what social engineers will do is they'll do things like they'll record the information so they don't have to remember everything and things like that to try and reduce the cognitive burden. They'll also sort of storyboard out the conversation. So I'm going to ask this. They probably will say one of three things. And so if they say the first thing, then this is how I'm going to respond. If they say the second thing, this is how I'm going to respond. And the idea of this is to just not get surprised and be able to anticipate the kinds of things that might be talked about. But they don't want it to come off as scripted or memorized. They're just sort of, they memorize the script and they're kind of going through it. Okay. Because they want it. The social engineer wants it to be a very natural, kind of conversation, right? And so anyway, so it's a fine line to walk, but social engineers will usually spend some time anticipating where the conversation will go and thinking ahead about what they would say in response to certain types of things and not memorize it. Okay, I mentioned recording, so that's a way of also sort of not having to remember so much information. And then there's also it's really difficult to always put your finger on why a victim or a target might think that there's something off about the person. So in the ideal, the best world scenario is the target will realize, oh, this is someone that's impersonating IT and not actually IT. Okay. And so there has to be something that triggers that. Or actually, maybe in the ideal world, it's just that they have very strict policies. And so they're like, you're not registered, you don't have access or whatever the case may be. And then you don't have to rely on people. Ideally, you don't want your employees to have to figure out whether someone actually works for who they say that they work for or not, right? So you have a bunch of rules and procedures that are meant to protect the organization, okay? But let's say in the fallback scenario, the target starts to recognize that, oh, maybe this person isn't who they are, or they just, something feels wrong about it. It's hard to put your finger on what it is about them, okay? What is it about this person that just kind of feels off? But anyways, it could come down to small details being off. So small details in how they look. By look, I mean how they're dressed or the equipment that they carry, the words that they use, the jargon that they use, how they talk, that type of thing. So anyway, those details. Do they seem if they work within the company? Do they know the lingo of the company itself? So if they're saying, I don't know, product names or things like that, or IT service names or things like that, if they mispronounce something, anyway, these are the kind of subtle things that a social engineer really has to prepare for. Okay, Then we move on to the forms of influence. So influence is trying to when the social engineer tries to get the target to do what the social engineer wants, they have to know what they want. Okay, so it's not like you just sort of go in open-ended and sort of see what happens, right? The social engineer usually has a specific outcome, or it's better to plan an attack around a specific outcome. As I mentioned with the conversations, there's a lot of planning that would go into the attack, and contingencies, meaning like, if the victim does this, what am I going to do, and that type of thing. Okay, so trying to think of all the different scenarios of what might happen and what the reaction would be. Okay, now not every social engineering attack is going to work, right? Sometimes it's not going to work, and so your contingency will be, how does the social engineer get out of the situation without raising suspicion, right? How can they exit the situation? And so that would be part of the contingency as well. And then any kind of disruption, so like emergency, construction, people on vacation, the things that we talked about earlier, that could influence when you choose to do the attack. And so engineers will try and time their attacks to exploit if any of this stuff happens to be available and it's exploitable, then that's when the attack will happen. Okay, now within influence, there's two types. So there's elicitation, I want information from the target, and persuasion, being I want the target to do something. Okay, so elicitation, the social engineer wants secret information. So it's information that they couldn't otherwise obtain. So they need to interact with the target in order to get this information. And there's a couple of techniques that are used to make elicitation easier, and they, to some extent, will overlap with persuasion as well. So these aren't necessarily exclusive to just elicitation. Okay, so the first thing we kind of mentioned in passing, this idea of a rapport, which is sort of like, how much do you like the other person that you're dealing with? And so sometimes, like if we go back to the video we watched, the bank employee, he didn't really build a rapport. He sort of went in and was very authoritative, like, I work at the bank, I'm going to call them, you're going to talk to them, kind of thing. Okay, and so that worked in that particular case. Okay, but other times you might, especially if it's sort of a longer interaction, or if it's not this sort of time pressure kind of scenario, then building a rapport might make it easier for the social engineer to elicit the information they want. So being likable, so the other person likes them, being friendly, trying to be funny, making them laugh, telling jokes, that type of thing. Based on the information gathering stage, the social engineer might know things about the target. For example, I don't know, your favorite sports team, for example, and so they might somehow try to work that into the conversation, and I like that sports team too, and that type of thing. And so the idea is that you sort of are on friendlier terms, and then you might be more likely to give the social engineer what they want, right? What they ask for. Flattery works as well. So complimenting, the social engineer might compliment the victim, or that type of thing. You can do preloading. So preloading is when you try to subtly introduce a subject before you actually have a conversation about it. Okay. So for example, let's say that so we'll use the example on the slide. So you're an IT, your pretext is that you're IT support staff. You want access to the server room because you have to perform an upgrade. Okay. And you're showing up at exactly, 2 p.m. in order to do this. Okay. So you can do that. You can show up out of the blue. But what you could also do is you could send an email. It would be a spear phishing email, in the sense that it's fraudulent. And you would send it only to the victim, but you might make it look like you sent it to the whole company. And it might just say, like, remember that there's going to be server downtime from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. today. Okay. And so the victim reads it. They don't really think much of it. Like the ask in that information it's not in the content of the email itself, right? It's just something that's sort of subtle. It's there. And then later, when the social engineer shows up at 2 p.m., maybe not, the person just thinks back to that email, right? It's sort of, oh yeah, I think I read something about that, or, and then it makes it more likely that they're accepting it. Okay. Now, I realize now that that's a persuasion tactic because you're trying to get access to the room, not an elicitation tactic. So that example maybe should belong on the next slide. But in any case, the idea of preloading overlaps between elicitation and persuasion. Another thing that's actually very specific to elicitation is you can purposely misstate something. Okay, so like say you don't know an information. So like, I don't know, say it's like a sales figure, right? So you're like, well, profits and loss last year were whatever, 30 million, right? And you actually, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get that right number. You have no idea what the right number is. So you say something that's on purpose that's wrong. And it's kind of human nature for the person you're talking to want to correct you and say, oh no, like actually you're wrong. It wasn't 30, it was 15 or it was 60 or whatever the correct information is. Okay. So that's a way of sort of eliciting information without explicitly asking for it. Okay. And another thing you can do, or a social engineer will do is they'll try and demonstrate that they already know a lot. So for example, if it's sales figures or whatever, in this case, they'll state the right facts. And in this case, the person that's interacting, the victim, they'll think, oh, this person knows a lot about it. There's no way they would know this much unless if they like sort of, are kind of in the inside circle of information. And so when they ask me about certain things, and I really probably shouldn't be saying it to them, but because they know so much already, then it's probably safe. They probably already know what they're asking about, or they're other people trust them with this information, so I should trust them as well, right? So in the information gathering stage, and elicitation can also work like sequentially. So you might have one victim, and the social engineer will elicit as much information as they can. Then they build up their knowledge database. Then they go to a second victim. They repeat the stuff that they elicited from the first victim in order to build a rapport and build trust with the second victim. And then they're maybe able to get a little more information. And then they can sort of ratchet up the amount of information. Okay. Okay. And then persuasion is like kind of trying to convince someone to do something that they're not authorized to do. It breaks the rules in order for them to allow the attacker to do what the attacker is asking for. Okay. So the attacker can use, like the social engineer, you might use like emotional manipulation. So it could be empathy, like making you feel sorry for the social engineer. So they might say something like, hi, I have a job interview. It's, in 30 minutes and I'm just checking in for my job interview. I had a really awful morning. All these things went wrong and, I don't know, my kids like did this and that, and I had to do this and I had to do that. And, I didn't have time to print off my CV. I really need it for the interview. Could you just do me a favor and just, I have it on a thumb drive. Could you just plug it in and print the PDF? It would be like a huge help to me, right? And so you ask that, and then, I don't know, the thumb drive has malware on it or something like that. And, that's the attack vector. Okay. It could be indebtedness as well. So like, oh, I noticed you dropped this, or, oh, I noticed your boss is coming and, I see you on social media. Maybe you should close that. And then after you do the favor, then you're like, okay, maybe you could do me a favor. Like you don't make it that explicit, like I scratch your back, you scratch mine, but it's that sort of implication that maybe the target is more willing to do you a favor if the social engineer does a favor for them. Another tactic that you'll learn over in the business school is if what you want is like, this is, I can't think of a great example off the top of my head, so I'll say a kind of dumb example. But like, say I want access to the server room, so I could ask for more than what I want. So I could be like, hey, I'm here with my 10 friends. We all want to go in the server room. And they'll be like, oh, you can't do that. And then you might say, well, maybe just I could go in, like, that's a very unrealistic scenario, right? But anyways, that's the idea, the general principle of you ask for more than you actually want. At the end of the day, you actually just want one person. So you think of, how could I ask for something that's more? Then they can have something to say no to, and then we can sort of settle on what the social engineer actually wants. That's sort of the middle ground position. So there's a kind of negotiation that goes back and forth, and it comes out where the social engineer wants it to come out. Other emotions can be manipulated. So fear, anger, coercion, anxiety. So this, social engineers that are doing this, like, I keep saying you, like I sort of put you, the audience, in the shoes of the social engineer, because I'm thinking of you as students that graduate that maybe become penetration testers that are doing social engineering. But anyways, if you've ever found yourself in a position with that job, these are the kinds of things that they're not against the law. You can go in and get angry at someone. It's not against the law, but it's unethical, right? To cause a lot of emotional distress in people, just because you're pen testing the organization or whatever. So, these are things that you would work out before you ever did the actual testing itself. You would have clear guidelines for what you're able to do or not able to do. But in a real world scenario where you have a real attacker, then will they use fear, anger, coercion, anxiety? Yes, absolutely. Okay, so that's the sort of theory. So that's the framework. It's useful for sort of classifying different social engineering attacks that we've seen and thinking about how you might modify social engineering attacks and things like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tell you a handful of stories of social engineering that happened, and we can also use the framework as we go through them to think about how they line up with information gathering, pretexting, and influence. Okay, so the first story has to do with RSA. RSA you might know as a crypto algorithm, which it is. But the people who created the algorithm also started a security company. I guess maybe initially it was about monetizing that encryption algorithm, but the company soon evolved to just doing anything in the whole security realm. And they're probably like maybe the number one biggest like security company in the world. They have a big conference, so probably one of the biggest security conferences in the world is this RSA conference that's sponsored by them. And all the other companies go to RSA, like to the event space that they put up every year, and they sell their products and things like that, and they have speakers and cryptographers talk. And the original R and the S in RSA, will get on stage every year and have like kind of a roundtable with some other cryptographers, and it's kind of a fun event. Anyways, so this is RSA. Now, one of RSA's flagship products is a product that we already talked about when we did the password alternatives evaluation framework. And so it's this two-factor authentication. It looks like the key fob that's in the slide. So it's, you attach it to your key ring, and it just has this random number. And when you log in, you put your username, you put your password, and then it will challenge you to put in the number that's appearing on the fob, and you'll put it in, and then it will either let you in or not, depending on whether the number is correct or not. Okay. Now, we can stop and think a bit about how does that work behind the scenes? Like, how does you have some number on a fob? Well, how does the server decide whether that's right or wrong? So the way it works essentially is, so this first is describing what I just said in Word. So you put your username, password in, say you're logging into Concordia. Concordia themselves maintain just a straight password database. So they know my username and password or a hash of it. And so they can say whether my password's right or not, but they don't necessarily know what's happening with my RSA token. So then what will happen is they'll ask me, what's the number that's on the screen. I'll type it in. And these devices work slightly differently. So some of them just every 10 minutes or so, it displays a new number. So there's sort of a countdown and then it goes to the next one. Sometimes you press a button and then it gives you a fresh number. So there's different designs. It doesn't matter really for the purposes of anything. So we'll just assume that it's one of these ones that changes every 10 minutes. And the idea is that if you use a weak password and I guess your password as an adversary, then I would also have to get access to your token. And because your token is on your person, I would need physical access to you. So think of an attacker that's somewhere in another country, maybe another continent. They could attack you. They could attack your account by trying to guess your password, right? And they wouldn't have to be, in Montreal in order to do that attack. But the idea of this RSA token is that you're forcing the adversary to also have to physically steal this thing off of you, off of your person, in order to complete the authentication. Okay, so it doesn't mean that it's impossible to break into the account, but it limits the number of adversaries to adversaries that can access something that you know and also something that you have, which is this token. Okay, so there's different configurations. So Concordia might maintain their own database, but usually what happens is companies, they're paying RSA to buy all these tokens. And so RSA just sells them a service as well and says, hey, this is our specialty. We're making these tokens. We know how they work. So what you'll do is you'll just ask the user for the number. They'll pass it on to you. This should all happen over HTTPS. So there's no problem here. And then what you'll do is you'll pass it on to us. Okay. And in order for this all to work, you also have to register. So you have to know which user has which actual token. So put it this way, if 10 people have a token, they're not all displaying the same number. So the token and the number that's being displayed is specific to that device. It's the only key fob that's going to have that exact number at that exact time. And so every user has a different fob. So the fobs will have a serial number or something like that. And so you'll register when you give this to Carol. You'll register the fact that you gave her the fob with this serial number. You'll tell that to RSA. And then they'll keep track of telling you whether the number that the user's typing in is actually correct or not. Okay, so how does RSA work? So what RSA will do is they'll have a list of all the users that are registered. So I have them by name here, but it might be by serial number. And Concordia keeps track of this username corresponds to the serial number, and maybe they send the serial number to RSA as opposed to the username. But that's a small detail that doesn't matter. Okay. So what they have is they have a list of them, and for every fob, what happens cryptographically is there's a random number, which is a starting number. It's called a seed. Okay. And you don't have to know the crypto details, but this cryptographic seed, there's a cryptographic function called a pseudo-random number generator. And what it does is it starts with the seed and it spits out random looking numbers. Okay, they're pseudo-random because it's coming out of an algorithm, but they look random. Okay, but technically they're not random. And if you start the pseudo-random number generator with the same seed, you'll get the same sequence of numbers. If you change the seed, even if it's just a small thing, like just a single bit different in the seed, you'll get a completely different stream of random numbers. Okay, so every user has this seed that's recorded, and then there's an algorithm, and the algorithm will expand this seed into the random numbers, and that's what's being shown on the actual fob itself. Okay, so the seed actually exists in two places. So the fob itself has the seed inside of it, and it has it in hardware, in the circuit of the fob itself. The seed is in there, and it's running the pseudo-random number generator and then displaying the output on the screen. And then RSA, the company, they also have a copy of the seed in this file called the seed warehouse, and they were storing it on one server. It also has the seed, and then they also know the algorithm. So what they can do is they can the other thing you can do is you can fast forward in time, so you don't have to generate it every 10 minutes. If you want to just jump to hey, given this seed, what would be the thing that's displayed 1 year later? you can just jump quickly to it algorithmically. Okay, so they, but anyways, with the seed, they're able to generate the same stream of random numbers. Once they have the stream of random numbers, then they can look at the clock, figure out what time it is relative to when they started this. So like when they give the fob, when they manufacture the fob, what they'll do is they'll put the seed in and then they'll start the timer, and then every 10 minutes it will increment. And so what they'll write down here is this was the seed. This is like the time, the wall clock time of when we turned this on and it started running. And so then what they'll do is they'll generate the full stream, and then they'll jump ahead in 10-minute increments into the current time, and then they'll figure out what the current random number is, okay? And it's sort of tolerant to slippage, so like if you enter a number that's from 10 minutes ago or even 20 or 30 minutes ago, the server will kind of look around this number in the stream and see, you know, if it doesn't match exactly, it will say, well, maybe the clocks are slightly off and out of sync. And so they'll look to see if it's a nearby random number, and if it's nearby, it will still accept it as authentication, and then it will adjust its internal clock to try and resynchronize with it. Okay. All right. So this basically is how this works. Okay. Now this seed file, first off, is highly sensitive. Okay. If you have the seed file for all the users, you have the equivalent of the fob itself. So let's go back to the motivating example. The motivating example is you have an adversary. They're not in Montreal. They're somewhere else in the world. They might be able to steal your password, okay? But they're not going to be able to steal this fob because this fob is physically on your body, unless if they're here, okay? But if they're able to steal this file is equivalent to the fob. They can generate what's on the fob based on what's inside the file, okay? And so if they're able to steal this file, then they can attack you. And stealing this file is a question of breaking into a server. And, you know, you can do that from another country in the world, right? You can do that over the internet. And you might say, well, this server, it must be highly sensitive. It's probably air-gapped and things like that. But think about it. Concordia gets a number. They send it to RSA. RSA has to figure out whether that number is correct or not and tell Concordia, yes, it's right, or no, it's wrong. And it has to do it in basically real time. And so what that means is that you can't have this file sitting in a safe, printed out on a piece of paper offline. It needs to be in the server, which is online, that's responding to you know, millions of these requests every second. And so it needs it at its fingertips. So it's got to be loaded into RAM, and it's looking at this file. So it can't be on some air-gapped computer, okay, for this whole system to work, okay? So anyways, so so let's say that this code is correct. We take the seed, we expand it by a year because it's a year after the thing was manufactured. The algorithm tells us that this is what should be displayed. What the user typed in and was passed on to us matches what we determined should be displayed at this time. And so then we say, yes, authenticate them, and then Concordia passes that on to the user, and now they've logged in and they're successfully in. Okay, so this file is sensitive because it basically has every RSA token in the world in a single file, and it's hot in the sense of having to be on an online server. Like the server needs access to it. It's using it on a second by second basis. It's not cold, as in it could be put into cold storage where you only have to look at it once a year or something like that. Okay, so what happened? So what happened is, for RSA, the company, is that somehow this file that's very sensitive got stolen. So someone was able to breach the server, the seed warehouse, and they were able to actually steal the file. And RSA realized that you know, these tokens are no longer secure, and so we have to notify the public about it. So they notified it, and part of, like, this happened, I forget what year it happened in, but now two-factor authentication is relatively common, although we tend to use our phones or other things rather than these fobs. But at the time, two-factor wasn't very common, and In fact, the kinds of companies that would use two-factor were ones that were very sensitive. So like a lot of U.S. government, U.S. military, or other kinds of companies that had really high security profiles, they were the ones that would tend to use these RSA fobs anyway. So the fact that those were the companies that were breached was significant because they were often protecting like information that was highly classified or highly sensitive information. Okay, and so what this means is you still have the password that protects it. So the adversary just can't log into everything now that they stole this file. But what you've done is you've reduced the second factor of authentication, and you've reduced it down to just one. You've taken out completely that second factor of authentication. Now you just have usernames and passwords that are protecting the information. Okay, and so anyways, in the open letter that they wrote, they also wrote a bit about how it happened, which was interesting. Okay, so how is it that this like biggest security company in the world, most sensitive like server probably within the company, how was it that it got breached? Okay, and so it's sort of a long story that involves some technical attacks, and not all the details are spilled out. But what was interesting to me, and the reason I'm bringing up in this lecture, is it actually all started with a social engineering attack. So that was the first toehold that the adversary had into the system, and then they were able to move around laterally within the system and compromise the server. So the social engineering attack worked with it worked through spear phishing. So I mentioned this earlier. So spear phishing is where it's not just a fake email that's kind of generic that you might send the same email to 1 million people and hope that you get 100 of them that click on it. This is an email that's crafted very specifically for a very specific target, and every small detail that you try and get right in terms of the email, which increases the probability that they would click on it. And you have to believe at a company, I think it was in the story itself, that there is a general policy that you don't open attachments in emails. So this person, you had to make the recipient of the email very comfortable with the idea of breaching policy in order to open the attachment because they felt safe with it. So what the email looked like, we actually have a copy of. So it looked like this. So it was sent to someone within the company. They worked within the HR department. There was other company individuals that were in CC, and these people all worked together. So like it would be very, very common for like an email that's circulated to say the recipient, for these other people to be in CC, okay? So this is information that the adversary had, the social engineer was able to gather through information gathering, and they were able to make this email look more right by having a sensible set of recipients for it. Now, it does come from a weird kind of phishing looking domain, so this isn't, so EMC is the parent company of RSA, so this isn't coming from within their same domain. Okay, so it is an outside email. But if you're looking at it really quickly and you just sort of see who it's sent to, who's in CC, that all looks fine. Recruitment plan sounds like the kind of document that might get circulated amongst a bunch of people that work in HR. Okay, and then it's just, I forward this to you, please open it, and there's an attachment, and it's labeled 2011 recruitment plan.xls. Okay, and so it just takes one person of the people that are CC'd on this in order to click on this. That was the adversary's goal. Okay, so anyway, so we know that at least one of them clicked on it, or at least that's suspected as the attack vector. Okay, now notice that because this came from an outside domain, the common practice today is to warn users of all emails that come from outside of the domain. And you can, to some extent, spoof emails too. So you could actually send an email that looks like it comes from emc.com, but there's some cryptographic protections that aren't always used called DKIM. So it could have stopped that that kind of spoofing as well. So anyways, the it was sort of, I mean, the victim could have done better with this email because there was a hint in this from line. Okay, but the rest of the email looks very sensible, and it looks like something. It doesn't look like some generic like kind of phishing email that you normally see. Okay, so the file itself. Now, what kind of file is this? Okay, so this is an XLS file. So what program is XLS? You probably know the answer to that. It's Excel. Okay, now is an Excel file like okay to open? Like even if you don't trust the person that gave it to you, and you're like, oh, maybe it's malicious or there's malware in it. Does it matter? Because it's just data anyways. It's not like an executable file, right? You open it, your spreadsheet displays some data, and then that's it. Okay. And so the answer to that question is that actually Excel files are dangerous because Excel's like one of those, it's software that kind of, became more and more powerful over time, and Microsoft kept adding new features to it. And so somewhere along the line, they decided, hey, it would be really cool if you could run what's called Adobe Flash. We don't really use that anymore. But if you could run this Adobe Flash within Excel, which is a scripting language, then you could do fancy things with your spreadsheet, okay? And so they added the feature. Probably not a lot of people actually used it, but it was always kind of there in Excel. The adversaries noticed it, and they noticed that there was a implementation flaw, not in Excel itself, but in Flash, okay? And this was a high-profile attack, and so the attack that they found in Flash wasn't an attack that someone else had found and they're just using it. It was an attack that they themselves had come up with. No one knew the attack was there until this email started circulating. So we call that a 0 day because there's no prior indication of knowing about the vulnerability. So they came up with the vulnerability themselves, and nobody knew about it. So Flash wasn't patched, and Excel had it patched to the extent that Excel could do something about it. So anyway, so the vulnerability was in Flash. Flash was running in Excel, and then this file had the vulnerability. Okay, so someone looked at the email. They looked, at least surface level at it. They decided it looked okay. They clicked on the link. When you actually click on the link, this is what happens. We have a video of it. So in this case, they're going to actually click the file. So you get a brief warning, but that's sort of a standard warning that you always get on all emails, anytime you want to open an attachment. So this is the standard one. And then when you open it, it's going to open Excel. The Excel sheet itself was blank. Okay, and it just had this weird like kind of symbol you can see in A1, there's this weird thing, and that's the embedded script. And by this time it's too late. So even if you're like, this is a weird spreadsheet and you closed it, it's too late, right? Your computer now has malware on it. So that's it. That's all it took. Okay, so the adversary was able to get this one employee's computer compromised or breached. And because it was in the HR department, apparently this computer had some files that had login credentials and things like that for other employees within the company. And so those got stolen as well. And then the adversary was able to kind of move from that computer to other computers. And we don't know a lot, like the details aren't fully spelled out, but essentially they were able to eventually move throughout the company's network. And eventually they reached the server that had the database of the seeds, the seed warehouse for all these secure ID RSA tokens. Now, another interesting aspect of this attack is, okay, now you're on the server and you have the file, right? You've compromised the computer that has the file, but you need to export that file somewhere. You got to move it off of the network onto an adversarially controlled machine, right? But in order to do that, you need to, for example, let's say you just open an internet socket to, the adversary does this to a machine that they control, and they start pumping data out, right? There's a chance, I mean, networks have intrusion detection systems and other things like that. And so this would be anomalous behavior, right? It would be unusual. And so that's the kind of thing that would get flagged. And so there's a chance that, you know, they might be able to move some of the credentials out, but you know, they might get caught, you know, partway through or something like that, and so they might not be able to get all of them. And so what the adversary did is they sort of disguised the traffic and tried to make it look kind of benign. They took the time exfiltrating the data, so it took about 9 hours. They sent it to Rackspace. Rackspace is a major corporation. If Rackspace knew it was being used by malicious actors, they also would have shut it down. And so it's sort of risky, but then it also the traffic looks more benign because it's going somewhere where you know, probably traffic from RSA goes anyways. So they were able to steal the entire seed warehouse. And so essentially all RSA tokens, with the exception of companies that run their own server, they were compromised. So they no longer worked. I forgot this detail, but apparently even if you did host the server yourself, you had the option of having a backup with RSA, just in case something happened to your server. Let's say there was a natural disaster or something like that, and you lost your server, and then all of a sudden all your tokens don't work. I correct myself and say that it turns out that basically all RSA key fobs were compromised. And so they decided, well, we have to go public with this information, and we'll of course replace all the RSA tokens for free. But you know, there was something like 40 million of these tokens in circulation, and they didn't have 40 million of these tokens lying around, right, to just replace them all. And so they had to manufacture new ones and things like that. And so it was a big deal. It wasn't just a quick fix. So it ended up being very costly, I'm sure, for RSA, the company. They did survive this, and people still use RSA tokens today, and they still run the RSA conference every year. Okay. Story number 2. So this concerns this guy, Matt Honan, who is a reporter, freelance reporter. He writes for different magazines, including Wired magazine. And so we know this story because he wrote about it. He wrote a whole article about it for Wired. Okay, so Matt Honan was a Twitter user. And he had his Twitter handle was @Matt, M-A-T. And it turns out, especially in the earlier days of Twitter when they had strict character limits, if you have a short username, it's handy because it doesn't contribute as much to the character limits. And it's just seen as sort of desirable, right? It's kind of like having a fancy car or something like that. Like it's a sought after item. To have a short username. Okay, and so this attack was all about the adversary trying to steal this handle. The adversary wanted to get control of this handle and take it for themselves. So what they did is, well, think about it for yourself. What would you do? So you see this handle, you want to get access to it. You can try and log in. There's going to be a username and a password. Presumably, the adversary is not going to know the password. Okay, so then what do you do? And so the answer is, well, you would probably try to do a password reset, right? You'd say, I'm Matt Honan. I forgot my password. Can you give me a new one? And so that's exactly what the adversary started off by doing. And so the way that Twitter works for password recovery at this time is if you had an email address that you used to register it, and you sorry yeah so you when you sign up for Twitter, you sign up with an email, and so it's just going to send the password reset to your email. Okay, so Matt had a Gmail account, and so that was his recovery email that was set. It was easily discoverable what this actual Gmail address was, but the adversary doesn't have access to the Gmail account either. Okay, so what are they going to do? They're going to do the exact same thing, right? So they'll go over to Google and they'll say, hi, I'm so-and-so at gmail.com. I forgot my password, right? So what Google does is they also have some sort of password reset policy. And so their policy is actually the same. So their policy is, hey, maybe you have a second email account. You can leave that in your Gmail account, and that will be used for recovering your password. So Matt Honan, so basically the error message came back and said, or it wasn't an error message, just a message, but it came back saying, okay, we sent the password reset to your email address at me.com. Now, does anyone know what me.com is? Right, you probably, I'm guessing that most of you probably don't know. So this was Apple's short-lived attempt at trying to do a Twitter or a Facebook kind of product. It was kind of like a social networking product. It didn't catch on with users, and so it doesn't really exist anymore. But anyways, so it's an Apple product. Okay, so the adversary again doesn't know the Apple password for this me email address either, and so but they can do the same trick anyway. So they'll go to Apple and they'll say, hi, I forgot my password. I'd like to reset it. Okay, now there's one difference between Apple, Google, and Twitter, at least at this point in time. Google and Twitter didn't really have, the need for customer service, and they weren't. They didn't have a lot of products that required payment. Okay, Apple did. They had iTunes, and your Apple account was sort of unified. So your me email account and your Apple iTunes password and all of that kind of stuff, they were all kind of linked together. So Apple was like, they were a commercial, like they were selling things online. I know Google does now, especially with Android and the Play Store and things like that. And Twitter has like paid versions of Twitter now. But Apple was sort of set up differently where because they moved more in the e-commerce direction, they felt it was important to have a phone line and like real human beings that you could go talk to if you have issues. Okay, so and they also had credit card information and financial information and that type of stuff on record for people. So what happened is the adversary went to Apple and they said, I want to reset my password, and Apple said, okay, great. This is what we need from you. We need your username. We need the address that's associated with the credit card that we have on file with you. And we need the last 4 digits of your credit card. If you can give us that piece of information, those pieces of information, then we'll reset your password for you. Okay, so the adversary knew the username because Google said where it sent the email to, or at least it was easily discoverable. Because Matt Honan also had a personal website, there is a directory of everybody that owns a website called Whois. Now it's common practice that you anonymize your Whois record. You pay a little bit extra when you register a domain, and there's a company, I think it's called Privacy Guard or something like that, and it will register it under its own name instead of registering it under your name. But for a long time, basically anyone who owned a website had to fill in a form with their name and their real world address. And so the adversary was able to get this information from the Whois record for Matt Honan's website. So the adversary knew the billing address. The last 4 digits of the credit card, however, the adversary didn't know. Okay, so now the adversary is stuck, right? They can't, without those 4 digits, they can't reset Apple, and without getting into the Apple email, they can't reset Gmail, and without getting into the Gmail account, they can't reset Twitter. So what they decided to do is kind of like the same attack, but they went around to other web services that Matt Honan may or may not have had accounts with. Okay, so they went over to Amazon, and they said, okay, we'll try Amazon. Now, Amazon, like Apple, I mean, more even to a greater degree than Apple, is an e-commerce site. Okay, so Amazon has like phone numbers and things like that that you can call if you have help. So the adversary switched over to the phone and said, I lost my password. I'd like to reset it. And the person on the other line of the phone basically said the same thing that Apple said. They said, what's your username, what's your billing address, and what's the last four digits of your credit card? Okay, so the adversary doesn't have the last four digits of the credit card. That's why they're trying to go to Amazon. The idea was that if they could somehow get logged into Amazon, then that credit card information would be saved, and then they would be able to see what the four digits were. Okay, so anyway, so they're kind of at a standstill, and maybe they tried other services, but they sort of got nowhere. It always came down to them not having access to the right email accounts or not having access to the last four digits of the credit card. Okay, now this is where the attack takes a kind of ingenious turn. So what the adversary decides to do is they hang up with Amazon, and then they call Amazon back. And this time they have a different story, right? They say, hi, I'm Matt Honan. I have a new credit card and I want to add it to my account. And so Amazon says, you know what, that's great. We love when people add credit cards, right? That means they're going to buy stuff with us. And so that's something that we're not going to give you a lot of difficulty. If you phone up asking for your resetting your password, we're really scared that you're not the person that you say you are, and we're going to give you a hard time about it. But if you call up just saying, I want to add a new credit card, right, then that's great. We'll take that information. And so they basically just add some basic account information to authenticate the caller. They didn't fully authenticate them, so they didn't require that they knew other information beyond that. So it was successful. So the adversary was able to add their own credit card to Amazon. Now, this seems like kind of a weird attack. Like, why would you add your own credit card to Amazon, right? It doesn't seem like it's going to do much, right? But then what they do is, so they hang up and then they call back again and they say, hi, I'm Matt Honan. I forgot my password. Okay, so Amazon says, well, we need your username, we need your billing address, and we need the last four digits of your credit card. So the adversary, as we've established, knows the username, they know the billing address. They don't know the last four digits of the credit card, but because they just added a new credit card, they do know the last four digits of the second credit card. And that second credit card, I mean, there's no distinction. It's in the account just like the other credit card. So they say what the last four digits of the second credit card is. And Amazon says, great, you must be Matt Honan. We're going to reset your password. And you can set it to whatever you want. So then the adversary logs in, and they look through the account, and they see that there's a manage credit cards like screen where it has all the credit cards that were added to the account. Now, helpfully, Amazon doesn't display the number; it stars them out, but it leaves the last four digits visible so that you can recognize which credit card is which credit card. Okay, so they're able to see not just the credit card that they added, but they're able to see the last four digits of the original credit card. Then they sort of go backwards through this process, and so now they know the last four digits of the original credit card. And so they're able to reset the Apple password. They're able to get access to the Me email account. There's an email waiting for them to reset the password for Google. So they reset the password for Google. Now they have access to the Gmail account. And inside the Gmail account, there's a password there's an email sitting there that's about resetting the Twitter password. And so they are able to reset the Twitter password, and they're able to achieve their goal of taking over at Matt, the Twitter account. Okay. Now, I wish this was the end of the story, right? But it turns out that it was actually a little worse than what I've depicted. So as the adversary kind of moved from these accounts, they decided that they wanted to kind of remove all traces of themselves doing it. And so what they did is they decided to delete things as they went through. So, for example, when they got access to Gmail, they deleted all the email that was in the Gmail account. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, I have so much information in my old emails. And, you know, this guy's a reporter, a journalist, and so all his contacts and drafts of stories that he's working on and all of that stuff is just gone. Okay, but it gets worse. At a certain point, Matt Honan, sort of in the middle of the attack, he started realizing that things were weird. And the reason he realized it was weird is he was looking at his phone and he picked it up and it was completely blank. Wouldn't turn on, or when it turned on, it would just go to the welcome screen as if it was a brand new phone out of the box. And so what had happened is Apple had enabled this feature called Find My iPhone. So if you ever lose your iPhone, you can if it has GPS, which all phones do, or if it's on Wi-Fi, it will try and locate it for you. And if you're concerned that your phone is lost, there's an option to remotely wipe it. So you can press a button and then it will wipe the phone completely. And so that happened. And so the adversary, when they were able to reset the Apple account to get access to the Me account, they also decided to wipe his phone completely. So all the contacts on his phone, photos, you know, whatever you have on your phone, maybe to some extent it was saved in iCloud, but basically that stuff was all gone. Now, for a short period of time, Apple, they really liked this remote wipe feature. They thought it was a great security feature. And so not only did they enable it on phones, but they enabled it on laptops too. And so the adversary also, in addition to wiping his phone, wiped his laptop completely. And so this is where he really lost a lot of data. So, you know, he had think of all the files and, you know, the work stuff that you're doing, you know, old tax documents, all that kind of stuff, personal stuff like pictures. So all his wedding pictures were on his laptop. They're now gone, right? He had all these pictures of his kids as they were growing up. They're all gone, right? All because the adversary wanted this Twitter handle. And what did the adversary do with the Twitter handle? Not much. I mean, they put on some like advertisements and things like that for people to click on, and that was it. Okay, so his digital life basically got wiped out just over this Twitter handle. Now, I should mention, how do we know all of this? And so Matt Honan had when the Twitter account got taken over, he created a new Twitter account and then messaged his old account. And the person was willing to talk, and they said, "I'll tell you exactly how I did the attack, and you can write it down and write a story about it, and then other people will take better measures to protect themselves." But what's the real problem here? In my mind, the real problem is Amazon, right? The idea that they would add a credit card without authenticating the person adding the credit card. That was the oversight in the policy, the security policy of Amazon, that created this whole attack in the first place. And so because this ended up on like the cover page of Wired magazine, it was very high profile. And as a result of this incident, lots of policies were changed. So Amazon immediately changed their policy, and people started reevaluating how they reset passwords and things like that. Okay, this is a very, very similar story. So this is another story about someone that had a short Twitter handle, @n. So this is a single character. He said that people had offered him $50,000 for it, but he didn't want to sell it. So this is there is a value for this kind of thing. Okay, so this story starts the exact same way as at Matt. The adversary goes and they say, "Hi, I forgot my password. Can you reset it?" And Twitter says, "No problem. We'll send an email to your email account." Okay, but the difference here is that the email was a custom domain. So instead of using Gmail, they had a custom domain set up, n.com or whatever, and that's where the email was going. Okay, now we talked a little bit, you'll recall when we talked about SSL, TLS, and certificate authorities, and how do you figure out whether someone actually owns a domain or not? Well, you can send an email to them, and if they can respond, then you'll accept that they own the domain. And we pointed out that there's all sorts of attacks that are possible with that type of thing. And so those types of attacks are also applicable here. So in order to figure out, well, first off, so the adversary wanted to figure out, okay, who's the domain registrar for this? So they went to Whois, and Whois said, okay, it was registered through GoDaddy. And so then they said, okay, great, we'll go over to GoDaddy and we'll do the same thing. We'll sort of say, I forgot my password, and we'll see where we get, okay? And this is where the story also takes a slightly different turn. So in the @Matt story, it's still social engineering because the adversary is pretending to be someone they're not. Okay, so there is that pretext there. Okay, but it's not like a super strong pretext because they're mostly like just, there was a phone call, I guess, but a lot of it's just using web interfaces and things like that. Okay, but in this case, the adversary decided to use very strong social engineering. Okay. So I should correct myself. I guess first off, they said they just did the password reset, and then it's the same kind of thing. What's the username? They knew it. What's the billing address? They could get it from Whois, and this time they want 6 digits instead of 4 digits, and they didn't have it. Okay. So then what they decided to do was a stronger social engineering attack, and so they called GoDaddy, but oh, sorry, I'm getting my story mixed up here. Okay. So GoDaddy, they kind of struck out, okay? Then they decided, okay, let's go to a different company and try it. Someone else that might have credit card information on hand. So they went over to PayPal, and they knew the account name and the username for the login for PayPal. They didn't know the password, and they didn't know the last 4 digits of the credit card. But okay, so as I was saying, now they're going to do a proper social engineering attack. So what they did is they called PayPal, but instead of saying, oh, I forgot my password, what they said is, I work at PayPal, right? I am in a different division, and they had some story, and I don't think the details of the story were outlined. Again, we know the details of the story because there was a conversation between the victim and the attacker. But the pretext here was that they were another employee of PayPal. And so they had some reason, like maybe IT reason or something like that for why they needed the last 4 digits of the account, but they couldn't get it. They didn't have access to it. And so the other employee fell for it, and they gave them the 4 digits. Okay, so now they have the last 4 digits. And so they go back to GoDaddy. They say, I lost my, they say, I want to reset my password. So they say, okay, great. What's your username? What's your billing address? What's the last 6 digits of your credit card? And so then the person, and this is on the phone. And so they say, you know what? I lost that credit card. I don't have it anymore. I do have the last 4 digits written down because it's in another account or something like that. Like that basically proves that I know who I am, that I have this credit card. Like, can you just let me reset it with 4 digits instead of 6? And the person on the other line of the phone said, I believe you, but I literally can't. Like I have this computer system, and if I do not put the 6 digits in, it won't issue the link in order for you to reset it. So like I can't override the system. I mean, I'm locked out of the system. But what I'll do for you is I'll help you guess those last 2 digits, right? So they were literally like, I guess my understanding is they were like 00 and then the actual 4 digits, 01, the last 4 digits, 02, the last 4 digits. And eventually after something like 10 tries, they were able to find those missing 2 digits, and then the password was reset. Now, if the social engineer wasn't so convincing on the phone, right? There is another path forward, which is just that you make 100 phone calls, right? You call up the first time and you say the last 6 digits are 00, blah, blah, blah. And then if it doesn't work, you hang up. You probably get 2 or 3 tries before the person sort of stops letting you try. Then you sort of hang up and you call back, and usually these call centers are big, so you're probably not going to get the same person. And then you can try a couple more, and you can maybe spread it out over a couple days. And as long as there's no flag that's sort of put on that account that someone's trying this a lot, you could easily find those last 2 digits. But in this case, none of that was needed. Okay, so with the last 6 digits, they had access, and then it was the same thing. They were able to reset the GoDaddy password. Then they were able to access the GoDaddy account. Then they were able to change the DNS record. Okay, so what they did is they changed the MX server, which is the mail server for that domain, and they changed it. The adversary changed it to a domain that they control, or to an IP address that they control. Okay, so now when the Twitter email is sent, the reset email, it will get sent to the adversary as opposed to the actual server that was accepting the email before. Okay, now there's only one problem with this, which is that DNS doesn't update instantly. It's kind of a distributed system. There's all these DNS servers all over the world. And so when you change it in GoDaddy, it takes a while for that information to propagate. So it could take up to 3 days, for example, to reach all the servers. And reaching Twitter's is the main thing that needs to happen, so that Twitter sends the password to the new MX Records server as opposed to the old one. Okay, and because it hadn't dated, the email was still active. Okay, so the victim realized, this reset happened, right? He got an email basically saying that just letting you know that your registrar entry was changed, and this was actually right after the other story, and it had been in Wired magazine and things like that. And so he knew the other story, and he said, okay, I know what's happening here. They want my Twitter account. And so he went and he changed the email on his Twitter account to something like Gmail or something like that. And so now even when the MX record changes, the adversary is not going to get the Twitter account. Okay. Then I can't remember exactly what happened, but basically a sort of communication channel opened between the two of them, and they started talking. And the thing is that, even though the adversary is not going to get the Twitter account in the end, they are still going to get all the email that's being sent to this person, to the victim, right? At end. And so all of that email, and then who knows what the adversary is going to do with that email, right? They could send back other stuff, or you know what I mean? And so the person was like, you know what, it's not worth it. It's not worth losing all my email and having it go to an attacker who's mad at me because I won't give them my Twitter handle, right? And so they reach a kind of deal where he would surrender the Twitter account if the adversary would reset the GoDaddy back to the way it was. And so that was the sort of negotiation that they had. Okay, so here's another story. So this story is kind of more local. So this actually happened in Ottawa, which is about an hour and a half from here. And it concerns an exchange service for a cryptocurrency called Bitcoin. So you probably have heard of Bitcoin in the news. I work a lot on the technology that underlies things like Bitcoin. It's one of my research areas. But anyways, what an exchange service is, it's where let's say you have some Bitcoin and you want to turn it into Canadian dollars, or conversely, let's say that you have some Canadian dollars and you want to buy some Bitcoin with it. You'll go to a website like Coinbase. This story doesn't concern Coinbase itself. This is just a general example. And they offer an exchange service. Okay, so the idea is that you would transfer your Bitcoin to Coinbase themselves. Okay, Coinbase would have a Bitcoin account. So now your account is mixed in with all of other Coinbase's customers. And then what they have is they just have a internal spreadsheet that it's more rigorous than that, but they have an internal database that maintains what the internal balances are for all of their users. Okay, but the point is that if you want to change your Bitcoin into Canadian dollars, you have to give possession of your Canadian dollars to Coinbase. It's kind of like a bank. If you put money in the bank, it's not in your pocket anymore. If the bank disappeared with your money, your money's gone, right? And so you have to actually give your Bitcoin to it. And what does it mean to own Bitcoin? So Bitcoin uses cryptography, and so they use digital signatures. And so the person who owns Bitcoin is effectively the person who can sign a transaction. So we talked about digital signatures a lot. So there's this sort of public key. And so what Bitcoin does is it maintains also kind of like a big database that says, here's a bunch of public keys and here's how much Bitcoin they own. And if you want to send Bitcoin from one person to another, what you do is you just sign a message using the private key that's associated, the signing key that's associated with that public key. And then the Bitcoin network will check that that digital signature is correct. And then they'll say, okay, you're allowed to send that money because you have the proper digital signature. And then Canadian dollars work kind of the same way. So if you want to move $100 into the exchange, you actually give the money to them. So you use Interact or a wire transfer or something like that. You would give the Canadian dollar, so it's now in the possession of the exchange. The exchange will add your account to the to their database of people that have Canadian dollars and keep track of it. Then let's say you want to do an exchange. So Alice wants to sell 0.001 Bitcoin for $100. Okay. And so she registers that offer in what's called an order book. And then Bob comes along and says, "Oh, I see that somebody is willing to is willing to sell their Bitcoin for $100. I actually have $100. It's on the exchange, and I want Bitcoin, so I'll buy that. That's a good deal. That looks like a good deal for me, so I'll buy that." Okay, and so then what happens is the money doesn't actually move. Right, because all the money, both the Bitcoin and the Canadian dollars, are sitting on the exchange. Okay, so there's no need for any actual payments to happen. But what the exchange does is they just update their internal database and say, okay, Alice now, instead of having 0.001 Bitcoin, she has $100, and Bob, instead of having $100, has 0.01 Bitcoin. Then at any time you can withdraw from it. Okay, so Bob could say, hey, I want my Bitcoin back. And Coinbase will say, okay, give us an address, which is a public key, and we'll send it to the address. And then after it's sent and it's finalized on the blockchain, then they'll zero out Bob's account in their internal database and say, okay, Bob doesn't have any Bitcoin anymore. And in order to do this, I should mention, they have to use their own key. So they because it was sitting in their account, now they have to sign the transaction that moves it from their account to Bob. Okay, so they're going to use their actual key in order to do that transaction. And so what that means is that their key needs to be, and that transaction is sent to the internet, and everyone expects that it's going to happen in seconds. It's not going to be like, okay, we'll send it tomorrow. It's not like traditional banking. Okay, and so what that means is that key to sign the transaction that belongs to the exchange, it has to be on a server that's connected to the internet in order for this to work efficiently. Okay, so we call it a hot file or hot wallet. Wallet is the term that's used to represent the file that stores a key. But the main thing is that it needs to be there. Now, if you could break into the server and steal the key, then you're going to steal all the exchange's money. Okay, so that key is both super sensitive, but it also can't be like locked up in a safe, right? It has to be sort of present because people are withdrawing all the time, and you need to be able to sign things. Okay, so what exchanges do is they take all the Bitcoin that they hold and they sort of split it, where they'll keep about 5% of their Bitcoin under one key, a key that's on a server, so they call it a hot wallet, and then they'll take 95% of their holdings and they'll put it on a computer that's completely offline, or they'll put it on a USB, like a thumb drive kind of device called a hardware wallet, and they that could actually go into a safe, or there's ways to set it up so that there might be 10 people that have these things, and you need any 7 of them in order to come together and move money from the cold wallet to wherever it's going, usually to the hot wallet. Okay, so but the point is that for any exchange that's in operation, there is some substantial amount of money that's sitting on a server, and if you can break into the server, you can steal the Bitcoin. Okay. The other thing I should mention is that you might think that people, they move their Bitcoin onto the exchange, they do their trade, and then they move it off right away, and they try and keep it on the exchange for the least amount of time possible, because if the exchange gets attacked or something like that, then their money's gone, right? So it's risky to use an exchange. But actually, the exact opposite is true. A lot of people like keeping their money on the exchange because now they don't have to worry about protecting their key. If you keep the money for yourself, you have to protect your key. So you have a file on your computer, you lose your computer, all your Bitcoin is gone, right? So you get malware, and the malware grabs that file. Usually it's password wrapped or something like that, but there's lots of ways that you could lose your Bitcoin. Alternatively, you could just move your money onto an exchange. Now you have a username, you have a password, you can reset your password if you forget your password. They're professionals. They're let them worry about the security of it. It's better. It's better than me trying to manage my own security. And so what ends up happening is people treat exchanges kind of like banks, and so they actually end up accumulating a lot of Bitcoin for their customers, and people just let it sit on the exchange. Okay, so that's just a sort of backgrounder on how these exchanges work. So the story I wanted to tell, the social engineering story, as I mentioned, happened to Ottawa. So it's not Coinbase, it was another exchange. I forget the name of it. I don't see it written down here. But anyways, it was a smaller exchange based in Canada, in Ottawa. And what this exchange decided to do is, instead of maintaining servers, because you have to think of the physical security as well of the servers, right? If someone is able to walk up to the server, right, then they could pull all the Bitcoin off and things like that. So what they decided is, we're going to pay someone else that specializes in hosting services. We're going to pay them to maintain our servers for us. So they chose a company called Granite Networks, which is a subsidiary of Rogers, I believe, in Ottawa. And so anyway, the adversary in this case somehow figured out, it might not have been that hard to figure out based on IP addresses and things like that, but they figured out that this server was at this Granite Networks place. Okay, so we know this because there's a news article about it, and so these are actually just direct quotes from the article, and they don't all cohere exactly, but it gives you kind of the rough story of what happened. So the article mentions that the Bitcoin thief started a customer service chat session. So they're not even calling them or anything like that. It's just like one of those chat windows. So they go to Granite Networks and they open up help. And they said, we work at this exchange, or we own the exchange, and you have our servers, and we need some updates done to the server. And at no point during the nearly 2-hour long conversation was the caller asked to verify their identity. Then we don't know exactly what happened, but they asked for some maintenance to be performed, and the people working at Granite Networks, they have physical access, like they were on premises, and so they were willing to do it. So they rebooted the server in safe mode. That usually disables a lot of security features that normally would run. So now that it's in safe mode, and we also know that at some point the adversary asked the employees to plug a laptop into it and basically allow them to sort of SSH into the laptop and then into the server. And so between all of that, they were basically able to steal all of the Bitcoin that was in the hot wallet. So it wasn't 100% of the exchanges. It was just 5% or 10% of what they owned, but it was still $100,000. So it was a fair amount of money. Okay, here's another story that I really like. This was a story I heard a while ago from someone named Cormac Hurley, who works at Microsoft Research and has written a bunch of papers and just has sort of interesting things to say about security. And so he was giving a talk, and this was the example that he gave. He said, okay, imagine that you want to, well, first off, what happens with sort of financial fraud is people steal people's bank accounts. They steal their credit card numbers and things like that. A simple story would be someone steals it and then uses it. But usually what happens is kind of more industrial. So what will happen is some hacker group will steal a whole bunch of credentials because they'll breach a website that has a database of credit card numbers or something like that. And so they'll have like 10,000 of these credit card numbers, okay? And then instead of trying to use them themselves, what they do is they just sell them. So they go in, they breach the web server, they steal the credit card numbers, then they put it on a marketplace. And so other people will come along and say, I want to buy the credit card numbers, or all the credit card information. And then the person that did the hack will say, okay, here's 2 or 3 just to prove that they all kind of work. Go try these 2 or 3 out, try and buy something with them. You'll see that they're good. And then I'll sell you the rest. Okay. All right. So imagine that you went on one of these marketplaces, and let's say there was a credit card and its balance was $10,000. Okay. So there's $10,000 that's available for you to spend off of this credit card. You're going to get the credit card. You're going to get the number. You're going to get the username, password for the online banking, the expiry date, everything you need. Okay. So you basically will become this person once you purchase this information. Okay. So the question that Cormac asked was, how much would you pay? What do you think the going price is for a credit card or banking information for that would have $10,000 worth that you'd be able to spend? All right. So initially, I this is my thought process. You can think of it through yourself. And so I thought, well, you're not going to pay exactly $10,000, right? Because there's a bit of friction. You have to take it over. It's kind of awkward to use. There's also a big risk that it just doesn't work, right? And so you're probably going to pay something less than $10,000. So there's going to be a discount just based on the chances that you're not able to extract the full $10,000 from this. So I thought, well, maybe it might be 8,000 of $10,000, or it depends on the seller and their reputation and things like that, and how the person might discover that this has been stolen. They might cancel it, so that's another risk. It's not in the seller's control. So maybe like 5,000, that would be kind of the minimum that you would pay. And that's like a pretty safe, you're basically saying there's a 50-50 chance that this isn't going to work. Right. And so anyway, so he gave his talk, and then he said, okay, this is the answer. So the answer is $30. And I was shocked. I was just like, how could that be? That's not possible. Right. Like you're paying $30 for $10,000, right? Like, how is this stuff so cheap? And so the answer to the question is you have to think about how you're going to try and use this. Okay. So let's say the adversary steals $100,000. Okay. Every transaction that they do with this is, because the banking system has identities, you can't open a bank account. Like, say you want to move the $10,000 to your bank account. That's fine. But in order to open that bank account, you have to show government ID. Okay. So now, the person who got their money stolen is going to report it stolen. And then the investigation is going to come to you because the money ended up in your account. Okay. So you can't just move money around the financial service in a way that's anonymous, right? Everyone is sort of is identifiable. Okay. So it's traceable. And the second thing is that if the money is stolen and it's pretty easily established that it's stolen, what the banking system can do is they can reverse the transaction, right? So let's say that you moved it into your account. The bank says, oh, that was stolen. So they move the $10,000 back. Now, what if you already spent it, right? Doesn't matter. Now you have a negative $10,000 balance. Like that money, it's going to have to get paid back, right? And so it turns out that it's really hard to move money around within the banking system, and that's the main reason why something that's enormous amount of money, like $100,000, or I guess I switched the slide. I should say 10K, but anyway, that's why 10K would sell for $30 or something, or 100K would sell for $300. Okay, so what the adversary does is, in order to move this money around, they use a slightly different kind of scheme or scam. Okay, so what they'll do is they'll steal the financial data, and then they'll email someone random. And you've seen these emails before. You probably just don't know what the scam is behind it. You know that there's some sort of scam behind it, but you might not know exactly what it is. Okay, so you get these emails, and it's like, oh, dear respected sir or madame, I'm from another country and I have all this money and I need to move it, but I can't do it for whatever reason. And so basically the bottom line of the story is, I'm going to send the money to you and you're going to send it to me. Okay. And for your trouble, you're going to keep a cut of the money, right? So maybe we're going to move around $100,000. You can keep 20,000 of it, and I'm going to keep the other 80. Okay, and so this is the scam you get. Now, most people think like eventually they're going to ask for some money. Like there are a lot of scams like this too, where they'll just be like, okay, before we do the trade, you have to pay me a bit in order to do some paperwork, and that's a scam. They just steal the money. But this particular scam, if you went through with it, the money would actually show up. Okay, no joke. Like, so what would happen is they would give the money from the stolen credential to you, and your account would actually go up by $100,000. And then the adversary is going to be really on your case, breathing down your neck, trying to get you to send them the $80,000. They're going to ask you to do it through some untraceable mechanism, something like MoneyGram or these anyways, or maybe Bitcoin or cryptocurrency or something like that. So they'll say, okay, I guess I set it up where you actually keep 80 of the K and you only give 20. So it depends on what the ratio is, or the ratio could be anyways. But anyways, you're going to send some fraction of the money to the adversary. It's going to be through an untraceable mechanism. And so the adversary will end up with that money and they'll be able to hang on to it. Okay. What's going to happen for you is, let's say you have 80K left in your bank account, is some days will go by and all of a sudden you'll get a notice from the bank that money was stolen. And they're sending it back to the person it was stolen from. And the person it was stolen from, they had $100,000 stolen. And, too bad for you, we're going to take the 80K back, but you're short 20K, the 20K that you sent. And now you're on the hook for that 20K. Okay. So the person that actually did the bad thing of having their credentials stolen, it's not always their fault. Like it could be on a website or something like that, but it could also just be that they, but anyways, the person you might say the victim is the person over on the right, because their money was stolen. But at the end of the story, they actually get all their money back. Okay. So they're fine. Right. The real victim was the person who got scammed in the middle, because now whatever percentage of the money they received, they sent to the adversary, they're short that amount of money. And so they're the ones, it's almost as if it is as if the adversary stole the money from them rather than the adversary stealing it from the person who they stole the banking credentials from. Okay. So this person, they're called the mule, in sort of this crime lingo. So they're the ones that end up short. Okay, the next story I'll tell you is another video. So this one's a little bit longer than the other video that we saw, but it's kind of fun. So the YouTube link is here. Again, I'll put it in the show notes. I now know that the previous video didn't work. So I'm not going to show it in this video. What's going to happen is I'm going to end this video. Then this will be the next video in the playlist, and then you can come back and I'll finish the lecture. Okay, so I'm back. Hopefully that was a fun video to watch, and it shows you that a lot of attention needs to be paid to the policies that companies use when you call them and how they try to authenticate you. And we're also going to do a lecture on policies themselves. And so that will be another thing that we'll talk. We'll circle back to this idea a little bit later. But for now, I'm just going to tell you one last story. Okay, so this story concerns somebody that was in prison. Okay, and so they were in prison, and there was actually software that was used to manage. Like there's a database where it's like, okay, here's the prisoner's name, here's their ID, here's when they get out of prison. And so all of that is just recorded in a database. If you're able to breach that database, then you're able to change the release date. And, there's a chance that like no one, everyone goes by that information, right? Nobody remembers firsthand what things are supposed to be. And so it might be able to do it. You might be able to actually get someone out of prison by just changing a database. Okay. And so the attacker wanted to do this. And so their idea was to get malware onto one of the on the network that controlled this prisoner database. Okay. So what they did is they did what we call domain spoofing. Okay. So there was a website that is used by like employees of the prison system, and it looks like this. It's like ewashtinol.org. I forget what the website does. You can actually try and click on it and see. Looks like it maybe no longer exists, but anyways. Okay, so this is the real website that these people used a lot. Okay, and what the attacker did is they registered a domain that looks very, very similar. Okay, so the only difference is that instead of a W here, there's two V's. Now, in the particular font on the slide, right, that looks quite different than a W, right? But depending on the font of a browser or the email client that's displaying a link, having a W as opposed to having two V's could actually look similar. And certainly if you weren't looking very closely and you were just sort of skimming it, it looks kind of correct. Okay, so we sometimes call this domain squatting because you sort of sit on a domain that's similar to another existing domain. Okay, so again, it's not like all the details are spelt out, but there was a news article about this, and so we know that there was some sort of phone call, okay, and the adversary, the social engineer, used the pretext of working for IT within it. I believe that somehow they said, oh, I sent you an email, can you click on it or whatever, but somehow they got them to visit this site instead of this particular site. And then there was an exploit on the website that they were able to do, maybe because they were using an old browser version or something like that. Again, the details aren't in the article, but they were able to get malware on the computer. Okay, so the social engineering attack is calling up, pretending to be IT, getting the person with the computer that's going to get infected to visit a URL that looks a lot like a URL they would normally visit, but is actually different. Okay. So once they got malware on the network, they were able to sort of move around from computer to computer. They were able to get login credentials. They were stored in a file, I guess, or something like that. And they were then able to break into the software that had the prisoner database, and they changed the release date for one prisoner so that prisoner would be released earlier. Now, in this particular case, it was spotted. And so, and then there was an investigation, and they actually caught the person who had hacked in, and they faced criminal charges, if I recall correctly. But anyway, so this was another social engineering attack. Okay, so what are the kind of high level principles that we can think about and kind of walk away from this lecture with? So the first thing is we saw a kind of weakest link principle where if, like, for example, in the @Matt story, Amazon was the weak link, right? They had an error in their policy, and because of that error in that one policy, the adversary was able to take over Gmail, Twitter, Apple, a whole bunch of accounts. Okay, so the adversary is always going to. It just takes one of these companies to have some weird policy and then the adversary might be able to break down the whole entire system. Okay. If you think about how would you protect against this? Say you're Amazon, how would have you caught this error before? And so there aren't good methodologies. This is a methodologies class. And so we're studying this actually not because there's a good methodology, we're studying it because there's not a good methodology. So you can think a bit about it, but it's obvious that it's going to be pretty hard to analyze and protect against because it's very like specific. Like sometimes it's like policies on the phone. Sometimes it's like, well, how do you know who you're talking to? How do you make sure that your humans aren't tricked by other people? It's not like a technical thing where you can throw some cryptography at the problem, for example, right? It seems like sort of difficult to deal with, but despite that, corporations are trying to deal with it, and so there's a lot of education about these kinds of attacks. There's training. So we do training at Concordia as faculty. It's not directly on social engineering, but phishing and those kinds of things, which are a piece of social engineering, they're covered in these training sessions. And then going over the policies and just trying to find those loopholes and see if you can spot them. And then, of course, if someone exploits it, then being able to quickly respond and fix it is also important. Okay. Another general thing that you can do is instead of having one person screen access, you can try and split that responsibility up amongst multiple people. So for example, let's say there's a signing key, you could split it up so that any 7 of 10 people can sign information, that type of thing. So now you have to compromise multiple people, not just a single person. You can go out and hire a security firm and they'll come and they'll try and do social engineering attacks against your company, and then they'll write you a nice report about what worked and what didn't work and what you could improve. And then you can also question how much do you rely on things like email addresses, domain names. Those are particularly vulnerable because they can be reset. SIM numbers we'll come back to in a few lectures when we talk about policies, but that's another thing that can often get reset with the phone number, and it can be actually quite damaging. Okay, so that's it for the lecture, and thanks, and I'll see you when I see you in class next.